Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for joining me again in one of these videos of the journey that we're taking together to get to know Qatari culture and tradition throughout the pages of its literature. Today we are going to go a little back to the work that it represents to have a book in our hands. So when a book is published, there is a group of people that have worked very hard to get that result done. Starting, of course, with the author, the editor, the literary agent, for example, the designer, publicists, and in some cases, and in very specific cases, then this book will be translated into another language. So today, in this video, we are going to talk about the importance of this work, of the translation work. Why? Because translation, in the basic definition of translation, is just changing a text from one language to the other one. Yet, the translation itself, and specifically of literary art, it is way more than that. Why? Because you have to translate not only the meaning, but also the tone, the flavor, or the context that this text is written. And it definitely needs certain skills to be a translator, and it's work that has to be make it better through time and through studies. So today we have Master ظافر here with us, and he's a translator. For how many years have you translated?
Actually, I started before more than 15 years, but the beginning was also before more than about 15 or 20 years, but not continuously about this. Sometimes translation, sometimes writing, etc.
So, Mr. ظافر, please, would you take us a little bit around your journey? How did you start it? Where did you start it? How did you decided to become a translator? And how was this journey in the literary artwork?
Okay. First of all, yes, I would thank the Qatari Forum for Authors for this opportunity. And also, we know that the Qatari Forum for Authors has their own aims to activate all the fields of culture and literature during all these maybe 2 years before they started, and until now they didn't stop at all. And translation maybe is one of their also interests. Regarding translation, when I started translation before more than 15 years or about 20 years when we started the first text, but in general, since that I studied English language and literature, so each one who studies this field tries not only to study the language as it is, but also tries to find a way to translate what he has studied from another language to his own language, to the mother tongue language. For this, I decided to translate some stories from English literature or some plays, maybe to study the plays of William Shakespeare. All of people who study English language and literature try to read and to translate many international works, especially from the most famous writers or poets. After that, I prepared myself to have my own way in translation. Of course, in the beginning, just only some short stories from all over the world. Maybe sometimes it's not, the original language is not English. Sometimes it's translated from another language, and this affects the soul of language. You know that when we translate a language from its origin, it is different from to translate one by one by one. For example, I translated a book just only 3 years ago, a novel for Mrs., maybe you know her, Asmanadia, Indonesian. I translated it from not Indonesian language, translated it from English. The edition was in English. So, of course, it affects the meaning sometimes. To translate it from another language, it affects sometimes the idea, the emotions, the feelings of the writer. It will not be the same after changing to many languages. Yes. So it is very important to get the original text, and after that, to know exactly what you are going to translate.
What Can you tell us a bit about your work as a translator? What have you translated? Which texts have you translated through?
In the beginning, before many years, when I started translation to translate articles, for example, from Newsweek, a newspaper, from Times, to my own language, to Arabic language, in the news for the behalf of newspapers in Syria and in Turkey. So when you translate an article about economy or about political affairs or about medical matters like this, it is different from translating literature, actually.
Of course, yes.
So I translated articles, so it is a material only. You don't need to feel what the writer sense. What is the sense of writer? What is the emotion and the feeling of writer?
Yes.
So just only translate the text from the source language to a target language.
Yes.
That is actually it is easy to compare with literature and literary works, especially with poetry.
Exactly.
Okay.
I was just going to ask you about poetry.
For example, when I translated this book is after the blockade, written by Mrs. Mariam Al-Hammadi,
Yes.
the general manager of the Qatari Forum for Authors and the general manager of culture here in Qatar.
Yes.
It is a media strategy. It is not a novel, for example, to go inside the feelings or emotions of the writer. It is, for example, text. We have to understand exactly what she is going to say.
Yes.
And it is maybe can be said directly, no need to have more activity and more creativity to go into the depth of the text.
Yes.
That's enough to understand exactly some idioms and expressions, and after that you will be able to translate it well and to give. But it is very important to know what the writer is going to say. Sometimes it is not directly. It is said indirectly, so you have also to keep it in the same way. No need to give another way to express the sentences or expressions of the original writer.
Yes.
You know.
Do you choose the publications that you translate? How do you choose? How is this process of choosing?
Yeah,
what do you do?
this is a good question. Sometimes, for example, if when we read good novels, we like the novels or we like the stories or the poetry. Even if I don't know the writer, yes, I try to translate or to publish, so and so. But sometimes even some writers who knows me or know me or I know them, I like their works, for example, maybe also I ask them to translate or they ask me to translate.
Yeah.
For example, when Mrs. Asma Nadia was here 3 years ago, we talked about her novel. The novel was The Forgotten Paradise. It was a social novel. It was very good novel. But for example, when I translate this novel from Indonesian culture, not Indonesian language, but it is written in English and in Indonesian language,
Yes.
we find that there are many differences from this language to another, to my own language, even in the culture sometimes, in the ideology sometimes. So it is important to know what is the writer going to say. Otherwise, it will be interpreted or understood in another way from the audience or from the reader.
Yes.
And that affects the aim of the writer himself or herself. Sometimes there are some points, if I translate an Arabic book to English, for example, maybe the English readers will not accept this book if they don't like the ideology of this book.
Yes.
For this, we have to choose well. If we want only to know what is the interest of the reader, we have to choose what is the other culture prefers to read.
To hear, yeah.
Or to hear.
Yes.
According to this, we can choose very accurately our text to be translated.
Wow, that's amazing, because that means that as a translator, you don't only have to look at the writing itself, but you also have to see who is going to be directed to and the culture that is around that language. Because it's true, each language not only means a way of communication, but the language itself, it comes with culture.
Yes, that's correct.
How long does it take to translate a text?
It depends on the text itself. For example, when translate a novel, a long novel, it is different from translating an article, for example. Sometimes, if you liked, as a translator, if you like this novel, if you like this literary work, you will maybe will not leave it until to finish it. Sometimes it doesn't need more than, for example, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, if you like it well.
Yes.
It depends how many hours are you available to translate or to work. But sometimes if it is a very long work, it needs time. For example, now I am planning or I am working on a collection of works, of literary and poetic works of Mrs. Suad Al-Kawari.
Okay.
She published her books, about maybe 5 small books, in one collection or in one complete collection. Now I am working on. There are 5 in one book. Of course, it's very thick, so it needs time. And especially, this is poetry. When you translate, as I said, like scientific material.
Yes, more technical language.
Yes, you just only need to translate as it is.
True.
But when you translate poetry, especially if it is deep, this language deep, you have to go into the depth of this language to know exactly what the writer or the poet wants to say. Other way, it will be understood badly or wrongly, in the wrong way. So, and it will affect the meaning of this text. And this is very, very important to take care of, especially the writer doesn't like his or her work to be misunderstood.
Yes. Yes.
If the translator is not skillful,
Yes.
has not good creativity or a good skill, he will make this text very bad in translation, or understood at least badly.
Mr. ظافر, if you allow me, one of the points that I want to highlight from this interview is that you have mentioned 3 authors. It was Mariam, etc. They are all women. And actually, one of the aims of doing these interviews and doing these videos is for people to get to know more about not only the Qatari culture, but about the Arab culture. And I want to highlight that you mentioned 3 authors that are women. So that means that here the culture really allows women and inclusive, they support women to express themselves in the art field. I wanted to ask you, how did you arrive here to Qatar, and what is your opinion on the Qatari literature right now? Actually,
when I came here, not for a long time ago, just 5 years or 6 years ago, for the first time when I came here, for literary activity in the beginning, especially after I wrote this book, Alfiyat Qatar. This book is about Qatar.
It's
in
about
general,
Qatar.
about everything in Qatar.
Okay.
For this, when I came here, I wrote about this book, and maybe I'm planning to translate, but as I told you, it is very difficult to translate, especially the traditional poetry.
Yeah.
It is different from prose. Verse is different from prose for this. So I came here, and of course I saw that, especially when I published this in the fair of the book fair, and
yeah.
I met Mrs. Mariam Lamadi and other colleagues, and I found that the Qatari Forum for Authors, it is not just a normal place for culture.
Yeah.
It has an intensive program every day.
Yes.
For this, and I participated many times in their activities. For this, I met many other poets and also members of the Qatari Forum for Authors. For this, I started to write and also to translate some works of them. For this, it was the beginning that I found that here in Qatar, yes, there are a large number, or there is a large number of authors. Sometimes we didn't know before.
Yes.
Before having an idea about the Qatari Forum for Authors, to be frank, I didn't know only some names from the books or from the internet. But after I participated with them and I attended many lectures here and many activities, I found that Qatar is full. Even Qatar is small, but Qatar is full of writers who are able to be worldwide writers, and their works can be translated to many languages. There are many works that have been translated, but also there are many to be translated. Of course, there are many writers who started just anew, and there are young men. And this is okay. So this is very good also step to start. But actually, yes, I found that Qatar is full of writers who deserve to read for and to listen for them and to have an idea about the Qatari literature through them.
Yes, so thank you so much. I want to ask you about your book, because you're not only a translator, you're also an author. And for example, I find this book very, very interesting. Can you tell us a bit more? Because it's not about poetry, it's one poem, right?
Yeah, it is one poem, 1,000 lines of verse about Qatar in general, from the beginning of Qatar until now, about all the achievements in Qatar, and about, for example, what Qatar was and what it has been. Now, what also arrived, for example, you know that every time we find something new in Qatar.
Yes.
There are also many other books before that book. This is, for example, this one is The Winds of the Age.
Okay.
The Winds of the Age. Of course, it is poetry.
Poetry,
Yes,
okay.
also poetry. And also, this is a flower over the ruins. And maybe it is clear from the picture, also from the yes, the cover.
Yes.
And also, this is On the Coast of the Soul. Also, this is poetry. There are, of course, many other books not here, but regarding translation, of course, I didn't have with me, now I don't have the copies of this.
Yes.
I translated some small books of Turkish authors, or Turkish writers and poets, from English to Arabic and from Turkish to Arabic. Some of them were written in English. It was easy for me to translate from English, but some of them were only in Turkish. Also, I translated some because my English is better than my Turkish. For this, I'm also starting to, because when you translate the book or even the poetry from the original language, it will be different, completely different, because it will not be transferred from one language to another, to second, and to the third language. This affects the meaning and to the goal of the writer himself.
There are many, not only writers right now, but translators and readers that are hearing us right now. And I would like to ask you if you can give us tip or something that you would tell a person who's starting right now to translate, or they are studying translation. What would you tell to these young people that are starting this journey?
A translation is not an easy job, actually, because when you translate, it means that you have to change, or not to change only, to convey, to transfer, to get something from one place to another place without being broken.
Yes.
For example, if you get something from glass, like now by the word glass, we have also now a new novel by Mr. Ahmed al-Muhannadi about the broken glass. For this, I remember now. He has now a new novel published just only 2 days ago or 1 week ago. It is a broken glass. Also, I am planning to translate it also into English. If you take something from glass from one place to another, you have to take careful not to be broken.
Yes.
Even translation is the same. When you get from a text from one language to another, you have to be very, very careful. That this translation is like something very, very precious. If you change the meaning, it will affect the meaning and the text itself, and also the writer himself or herself, because the writer cannot accept his or her text, his or her words to be misunderstood by the reader. For this, it is very important for the translator to read both, or to be excellent and skillful in both languages, to go into the depth of the new culture. For example, if I will translate a book from Malaysian, from Spanish, from another, for example, a language. I have to know an idea about the background of this culture. The people, how do they think, how do behave, because it affects the text himself or itself, especially if it is a story or a novel or a poetry. Because if you cannot understand the writer himself,
Yes.
you cannot go into the depth of the reader. The reader will not accept just only translate words. Translation, to translate scientific matter or subject or material is different from translating the soul of the writer.
True.
So it is very important for translator to read too much from the original language and to read many books of translation, because you can balance and compare between your translation or between even the translators themselves. When you, for example, there are many translators who are very famous and who translate many books. When I read some translation for this writer or for this translator, and I compare it with another one, I understand exactly the ability and the proficiency of this translator and compare it with the, and how can I be? If I want to be like this, if I like this work after translation, so this means that I have to translate in the same way. Otherwise, the reader will compare, especially if there are some works which have been translated by many translators. They will compare which is the best. How can we accept this translation and this from this one and the other one who broke the language of the book?
True.
For this is very important to read too much, to be able to know the goal and the target language and the source language, and after that you can compare between both of them and to get the all and the goal of your aim of translation.
With this comment that you made about comparisons and learning from other people, you just reminded me about a quote that I saw a few days ago where it said, like, normal people learn from their experiences, but smart people learn from other people's
Yes,
experiences.
that's correct. That's correct.
So I really liked your tip for new translators. In your case, Mr. ظافر, what are your future plans? What are you planning to do? Are you planning to continue writing? What is your goal in translation? A little bit more of what you want to do.
Actually, I'm in the beginning and at the end. I am a writer and I'm a poet. I write poetry, by the way, because translation is something different. Because sometimes I work in newspapers as translator. For this, I started translation, or this. It is not actually a career, more than a hobby. Because when I like a novel, I try to translate it because I like this one and I think that the people will like it.
Yes.
For this, it is different from being only a career or profession. But for me, yes, of course, I'll continue writing poetry, and maybe I have a project of novel, of course. But of course, when I say novel, this means that maybe I have an aim of this novel, because maybe sometimes we get the idea from society, and I want to show it to the society in general. But of course, I will continue writing in poetry. And in translation, of course. In translation, I am planning to do many works, because now I have the work of, as I said, Mrs. Suad al-Kawari. It is very thick. It needs time, actually. And also there is a plan for Mr. Ahmed al-Muhannadi, the broken glass. I am planning, I will, of course, will discuss with him. We'll discuss about this, a little bit about this. And of course, there are many other works, especially for the members of the Qatari Forum for Authors. And I announce from here, from this place, that I am ready to translate for all of my colleagues of the members of the Qatari Forum for Authors for free, because they are my colleagues. And of course, to encourage the process of translation here in Qatar and in the Qatari Forum for Authors for all the members. And this gives the way for other also translators or other colleagues to start in this initiative and in this project, if we can say. And I think we need more works to be in our library, in our home, in our national library. So every day, every time when we find a new book, you cannot imagine the writer or the translator himself when find a new book has been published in the society. For this, it is very important for a writer to have a new book for himself and for others to be published and to be read by all people.
Well, Mr. ظافر, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for teaching us the importance of the translator in a book which is almost as important as the work of the author himself. Thank you so much. I don't know if you want to give a few last words.
Thank you very much again. Just only I want to emphasize that for that translation is an important hobby and an important career. Translators must take care of and must be honest in translation, not to take care only the attitude, not to be influenced by their attitude. If they didn't like this text, not to be influenced by their emotions, to be honest in their translation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aydin. Thank you so much for joining us again. See you soon. شكرا جزيلا. السلام عليكم.